Good evening. With just 3 days to polling day, the state of the NHS is once again dominating the election campaign. Boris Johnson has been criticised after initially refusing to look at an image of a 4-year-old boy with suspected pneumonia who had to sleep on the floor of a hospital in Leeds. As other party leaders, including Labour's Jeremy Corbyn, accused the Prime Minister of just not caring, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, later apologised for the boy's experience. Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, has the latest.
Not long left to roll. Boris Johnson wants to win and hopes he can do so by taking territory that's been Labour forever, but where the majority voted Leave.
People in this part of the country, people across this country, spoke and said that they wanted to leave the EU. Now is the moment for us to get on and do it.
Beyond that familiar mantra, though, is he really in tune with millions of people who rely on public services and worry about them?
Do you want to take this country forward?
Like 4-year-old Jack's parents, whose son had to wait on the floor in a Leeds hospital, pictured on the front page of the Mirror newspaper today.
I'm talking about this boy, Prime Minister. How do you feel looking at that photo?
Of course. And let me tell you that I haven't had a chance to look.
Why don't you look at it now, Prime Minister?
I'll study it
Look
later.
at it now.
Boris Johnson awkward when an ITV reporter asked him to respond directly to the photograph.
You refuse to look at the photo. You've taken my phone, put it in your pocket, Prime Minister. His mother says the NHS is in crisis. What's your response to that?
I'm sorry. It's a terrible, terrible photo, and I apologise, obviously, to the families and all those who have terrible experiences in the NHS.
Although he was flanked by a former Labour MP today, this is not safe ground for Boris Johnson, not at all.
Why were fake websites set up? And
there were tricky questions from the audience on the Tories' behaviour online, Brexit and the TV licence fee. It certainly wasn't his home crowd.
Do you really think, after nearly a decade of a very significant squeeze on public spending, that you as a party understand the concerns of people in the north of England? Especially since today you struggled to look at a picture of a 4-year-old boy on the floor of an emergency department in a hospital in Leeds.
Well, I'm very proud of what we are doing to rebuild Leeds General Infirmary, and it's one of the hospitals that we will rebuild from the beginning. It will be a fantastic project, and we are putting, as I say, the biggest ever investment into our NHS.
Boris Johnson's here trying to get Tory people to vote Tory in this part of the country. Do you think that's going to happen?
I hope not. Right. We've had 9 years of awfulness.
But others are for turning.
We'll change into Tory.
How will you vote this time?
For Tory. Just to keep Jezza out.
At this late stage, though, today Labour was given a big chance in front of a big crowd in Bristol to push on the bruise.
The Daily Mirror today shows this picture of a 4-year-old boy suffering from pneumonia being treated on the floor of a hospital. And
all the way through, they've attacked the Tories on how they've dealt with the health service.
The Tories have had 9 years to fund our NHS properly. It's time to bring their regime to an end and elect a Labour government that's determined to fund our NHS properly.
The Health Secretary was dispatched to Leeds General to try to calm things down.
It's not good enough, and I've apologised. I've got 3 small children myself. I've spent too many evenings in A&E, and I know what it feels like.
The Health Secretary, though, was harangued by a small group of Labour protesters on his way out. The two sides in this election are miles apart. With only 3 days to go, tensions are on the rise.
Well, we're going live to Skipton this evening, and Laura joins us from there. When you look at today's campaigning, Laura, and we see what the Prime Minister was trying to answer from that reporter in your piece there, how damaging a day has it been for him?
Well, Hugh, this is a critical moment in the election campaign. There's only a couple of days yet, and however you look at it, this has been a bad day for the Conservatives on the campaign trail. The Prime Minister has spent the day certainly on the back foot, and it's given his opponents, especially the Labour Party, another big chance to push away, to hammer away at what they perceive to be an area of real vulnerability for the Tories. Not just their handling of the NHS and whether or not the health service really has enough money to do the job it wants to do, but politics is about empathy as well. And it seemed today that Boris Johnson really struggled to show that. And that has been a question we've heard from many voters around the country, whether or not the Tories really understand what millions of people around the country are dealing with and maybe perhaps struggling to go through. Clearly, in that regard, it's been a very, very tricky day for the Conservatives. Tonight, frankly, it's just though impossible to tell whether this kind of event, which has been a big moment in the campaign, will really have an impact on the final result. But it will certainly have taken a hammer to any complacency that might be setting in at Tory HQ. A reminder that this election might be in the final furlong, but it really isn't over yet. Another couple of days yet left to go.
Laura, many thanks once again. Laura Kuenssberg there for us in Skipton. Let's take a look at some of the day's other election news. And as we heard in Laura's report, Boris Johnson has suggested a Conservative government would consider the future viability of the BBC licence fee in response to a question from the public. He said it was worth considering if the current funding model for public service broadcasting still made sense. The Lib Dem leader, Jo Swinson, has come under pressure over her claim that she could be Prime Minister and that her party would revoke Article 50, that's the mechanism for delivering Brexit, if it won the election. Contributors to a BBC 5 Live phone-in this morning, including some former Lib Dem voters, were overwhelmingly critical. Jo Swinson said she would review her campaign after the election. The SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, has again warned that only a vote for her party in Scotland on Thursday can prevent a Conservative majority at Westminster. She said that Boris Johnson had proved himself to be untrustworthy as a Prime Minister. Well, representatives from all of the main political parties contesting the election have faced each other in a special BBC Question Time for the under-30s. They debated climate change, housing and mental health issues, among other things. Our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, has been taking a look at the issues that are important for younger voters.
Audience consists of younger voters.
Whether it's climate change, housing, Brexit or education, young people are often passionate campaigners. But when it comes to elections, they're still significantly less likely to vote than older people. But one issue seems to resonate with every generation.
How can it be democratic to have a second referendum on EU membership for implementing the result of the first?
Labour wants to negotiate a new deal and then put it to another vote.
One of the things that I found very frustrating is that people think that we're trying to stop Brexit. That's not what we tried to do. We've not been in government. I don't personally subscribe to people didn't know what they were voting for. I think people did, and I understand people's frustration.
Because politicians have failed to do their job, we have to take it back to the people, because it's only the people now that can end the impasse.
There isn't a Brexit deal that protects jobs, that is good for our economy. And the people that are trying to say that that is the case are trying to peddle something that is simply not true.
I think we'll be better off. You think we'll be worse off. What we think is irrelevant. The country voted, and your party, I remember the late Paddy Ashdown saying, we will respect the voters and we will implement the result, and you have broken your word.
Many in this audience are keen to have their say on Brexit.
How can you justify giving my grandparents 2 votes on the matter of the EU whilst I myself, who is going to be affected by this, has not had one?
16-year-olds should also get the vote because they're going to be lasting with it a lot longer than any of you will.
And what about climate change?
I know the Conservative government ticked you off and chided those young people for skipping school and how dare you, and it was terrible. I was really proud to be part of a Scottish government that said, you know what, bloody well done, because you brought the issue right up the agenda, exactly where it needs to be.
See, we're the only ones that are saying we can have a hopeful vision where we can cut people's bills by super insulating their homes. We can get people out of their cars by cutting public transport fares.
You're going to have to borrow a heck of a lot of money to do that.
Yes, you will. And frankly, you know, if the climate were a bank, we would have bailed it out by now.
Another question.
And no surprise that this issue came up.
How can we be sure any future houses are genuinely affordable when private companies are expected to build the majority?
We've built, in the last year, more homes in this country than any year bar one in the last 30 years. There's a role for the state in that, but we're also trying to encourage, through reforms of the planning system and infrastructure, the private sector as well.
At the last election, there was a small increase in the number of young people voting. Their involvement could be crucial on Thursday. Vicky Young, BBC News.